Welcome to Old Path and our Monday studies through the Old Testament. We have just completed the book of Proverbs, and now we head on to the book of Ecclesiastes. I looked it up this morning, actually. I was kind of interested to find out. For me to get through Psalms and Proverbs has been almost a 2-year project, if you can imagine that. And so we're finally moving on to Ecclesiastes, and Proverbs took a little while. Of course, Psalms took a good long time to get through. It's just such a big book. But really at this point, I very much look forward into just kind of going through these. There's some really, really interesting books coming up to us. We'll be getting to the prophets, and I'm very much looking forward to doing that. A couple of real quick things. The Israel trip, I've been making announcements about this, and I've had a lot of interest of late, and so I just want to make sure if anybody's kind of on the fence with this, we're going to try to cap this. If the interest in it turns out that everybody that's been expressing interest wants to go and is ready to sign up, we may very well hit our limit. And I am going to be limiting the trip, because the bigger that it gets, the harder it is for us to get to all of our locations. So you hear me, if you've been a part of the program, been listening to this for a while, you'll know that I've been announcing this for quite some time. And if you've been on the fence and haven't really wanted to look into it, or if you do want to look into it, but you just kind of been putting it off, I do want to make sure that you do know that we are going to be limiting the size of the trip. And so at that point, all I would have is a waiting list, and even those are kind of tough because it's last minute. But if you're interested in going and maybe you had put it off for a while, at least start asking the questions, because we may very well hit that limit. So I just wanted to make everyone aware, and full disclosure, we are going to be putting this at somewhere between 30, maybe 35 people, and that's about as far as we're going to go. I've been on trips where there's 50 and 50 plus, and they're really tough to get to a full load of all the places that we want to go. We've added places and locations since those early trips that I took there that had the 50 and 60 numbers, close to that number. So I don't want to do that, and I want to make sure that we are at a good, comfortable level. So if you're interested, please contact me, let me know, and I can get you the details on the actual trip. What we're going to do as we conclude today, along the lines with Israel, it's kind of an important thing as we're getting into Ecclesiastes. Ran across a video that it was more of the title. It was a suggested video from my page, actually, and it was about what is known as Christian Zionism. And people throw that out, and I don't know how often they really pay attention to it, and I don't know how much they really understand the whole topic. And so as I think I got a pretty good grasp on it, I will be happy to put it all together at the end of this. But we really ought to take a look at this from a scriptural point of view, and not just because of what's in the news. Those two things are completely different. So I want to kind of approach that and take a look at it, and I think it's something that we ought to, as Christians, know how to answer, and make sure that how we formulate our own beliefs is on a biblical basis, and not just because we're stirred up by emotion. So I know even that might sound provocative to some people, but it'll make sense when you stick around. Hopefully you do, and you get a chance to hear what we're doing. So book of Ecclesiastes. Now, fascinating book. What we're going to do as we get into the actual text itself, we're going to read the verses, and I want to do a little bit of background, which I think we did at the beginning of Proverbs. I didn't go back to listen to make sure, but I think it's really helpful to us to look at the writer of this, and believe it or not, there's actually discrepancy, or not discrepancy, but disagreement in some that Solomon is actually the author. I don't count me among them. I think it's pretty obvious it's him. But more importantly, when you see this, and I believe that Ecclesiastes, I think it's pretty clear, it's written towards the latter part of his life. And boy, oh boy, do you get a lot of regret in this man. And so I think you could probably be able to trace the steps of how did it get to that place. So I want to look at that kind of as we begin this the study here, looking through the book of Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes, when you try to think, well, what does that have to do with the Hebrew language? Is it something in the Hebrew language? It's really where we get the word that's used in the New Testament for church. The ecclesia is the gathering together of the people, and so that's it would be seen as a church. the easiest way for us to look at it without getting into all of the, the textbook or the dictionary terminology of the Greek on ecclesia, it's just the gathering. But he refers to himself here as he refers to himself here as the preacher. He's the person who is putting the information forward, and it's to the assembled. So the people who are there to hear what the preacher would have to say. And again, he's using a lot of imagery in this, and that's why you would see the people that were bringing us what is a modern day translation of this, they would call it Ecclesiastes, because here it is the preacher addressing the people that he is writing these things to. And I'm telling you, it sounds like the words of a very frustrated, a very discontent man, until you get to the very end of it, because you just realize that there to him is a hopefulness in the end of all of these things. But can you imagine being a guy like Solomon and living your entire life in what would be, I don't know how else to describe it, other than you have the incredible privilege of being the child of the king of Israel by which they are all measured. Now, David, with all of his flaws, and ultimately when you think about it, Solomon is the son of David and Bathsheba. So that's going to really kind of weigh on you for your whole life. That's going to be something that's kind of, it's going to kind of goof with your head, I think. And there are some things that he says early on in his time as king, and then something that happened right in the middle. Kind of like with David, starts out so incredibly well, and that indiscretion, that sin that he had with Bathsheba, set a trajectory for the rest of his kingship. I believe that's kind of where you can look at it historically, and you could see things changed dramatically because of how evil that was. It wasn't just that he committed adultery. He had her husband was murdered, ultimately because David sent him out knowing he wouldn't return, and he had other people involved with it. So it was dishonest. It was, oh my gosh, when you just go through it, the whole story is just sordid. It's awful. It's ugly. There are some things even about Solomon's life here too that we look back and go, man, how on earth did you let yourself get to that place? And then you see here, if we look at it like that Ecclesiastes being written kind of in retrospective, which is pretty obvious that it is. If this is later in life, he has an ability to look back and say, man, I started so incredibly well, but what I did and my failures really had such a ripple effect. And it's a pretty telling thing when you look at it and really kind of consider it from that point of view. So that's the kind of the tack that we're going to take with it. And as he says the things that he says, it only takes the opening verses and you kind of get an idea where this is all going to go. But it concludes very, very interestingly. And it's really, frankly, it's one of my favorite books in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. I just find it intriguing, and how you can look back at all of the potential of things, and yet if you allow yourself to fall into failure, just how bad that can turn out. And the ripple effect of it is devastating. So, Book of Ecclesiastes, let's go ahead and turn there. And let's have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at the text. I'll read the first 11 verses, and we'll kind of go back through it, but making some observations at the beginning. And the observations, I guess before we even pray, I'll just say this. This should be the way that we approach the scripture every time that we come to it. This is part of the study method that I was taught very early on, and I think it's a very good, foolproof way of genuinely understanding the scripture. You begin with your observations. Who's the writer? Who's the audience? What's the thought behind it? And what is he trying to communicate? There's a lot of observations that you can make. The observations we'd make in this is there's a lot of regret in this man, and this is a guy who kind of could have been able to exhaust every potential. If you wanted to find out what life could offer to you, man, he had it at every turn. So there's nothing that he would have lacked. And at the end of it all, he sees it as nothing but futile, and he sees it as fruitless and meaningless, and there's just nothing there. And I say all that because think about how you hear this written. And again, Solomon is the king of Israel. He knows the God of the Bible. At times he has been very much in a place of kind of rebellion against it, but when it's all said and done, he comes back to that understanding that really ultimately God is who he is. But the hope that there is in the believer, in the Christian, because of Jesus and because of the relationship that we have with him, because we know what's coming, because we really have especially through the books that we're studying in the New Testament, Revelation and others, we know what comes next. We know what happens when this life is over. We know about the eternal kingdom. Remember when Solomon would be writing these things, there are no prophets yet that are writing as we know them. None of those guys have begun. So starting with Isaiah and moving on, none of the major or minor prophets have spoken. And he certainly doesn't know anything that we know in the New Testament sense. So I guess you could say the summation of a life had a lot more meaning. It was much more final to a person in the Old Testament sense than it would be to us, because we know what's coming next, and we have a good idea of what is to be expected going forward. So from that perspective, you can see that the futility of life is something that is really on his mind. And yet when we look at it as Christians, we should never come to the same kind of just almost despair that you see in some of his words, because the gospel has changed everything. Man's trajectory of being able to know where he stands with God at any one time is a different thing altogether, entirely different from anything that Solomon could have understood. So we'll make those observations when we get there, but we'll be in verses 1 through 11 today. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at the text. Father, we thank you once again as we come to your word. So grateful for what it teaches us, and looking back, this kind of almost philosophical way that Solomon looks back on his life, and there's so much that we can learn from this, and putting too much emphasis on the here and now and the temporary as opposed to the eternal. I pray, Father, that we would understand that we would learn it, and that we would make proper application to your word. We give to you all thanks and praise, and we ask that you glorify yourself in Jesus' name. All right, so in verse 1, again, we're just going to read verses 1 to 11, make some observations, and we'll go back through the text. It says, "Now the words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." He uses that term 5 times in one verse. So you got a good idea what's going on with him. Now, verse 3. "What profit has a man from all of his labor in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes away, and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to its place where it arose. The wind goes forward to the south, and then turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually, and it comes again in its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they will return again. All things are full of labor, man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is that which will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun." Second time he said it. "Is there anything of which it may be said, 'See, this is new'? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of the things that are to come by those who will come after." Now, when you read that, just ask yourself the simple question: does that sound like a profoundly sad commentary on things? And how futile and almost depressing is it to read that, if that's how you look at things? Now, let's be honest, we can get to that those places in time when it just becomes the mundane of things, like, man, will this ever be different? Will it ever change? We can definitely see times in our existence where, my goodness, will this ever come to an end? This sounds a whole lot different. This is a lifetime in retrospective, and it's pretty cynical when you stop to think about it when he says this initially. Now, you could make all of these observations and still be incredibly optimistic in the end of it. I can look at everything that he says here, and I would never look at this and say, "You're so wrong, Solomon, you just don't understand." I can look at this and say, as the world is concerned and the way that the world functions, I totally get it. But again, as a believer, this is not all that there is. As a believer, we know that our time here is but limited. Paul would just tell us that we're here for a time, and then it's just done. James would tell us our life is a vapor, and that it's here for a while, and then it goes away. And so the idea of a temporal of everything, if everything was here just in this life, then yeah, it's a pretty depressing thing. There's nothing to look forward to. To the believer, that's not the case in any possible way. So when you see the things that he's expressing here, let's do a little bit of a rewind on how do you get to this place. When you read again verse 2, where it says this, vanity of vanities. Now, vanity just means it's empty. It is of no value. So as he kind of, surveys the landscape, if you will, at the, towards the latter part, it's an older man, and he looks back at everything and he just goes, it's just useless. There's no end to it, or there's no outcome to it. It's just void. It's empty. There's nothing, there's no value to it. It's vanity. So how do you get to that place where it just sounds so cynical, but it started out so well? Let's turn to 1 Kings chapter 3, and that'll start us getting a chance to look at this and see how it gets to this place. And again, I think that this is, I think it's a pretty instructive thing for us as we read these passages, and just remember that our, if you will, our trajectory. What we're reading here is the trajectory of Solomon's life. David has passed away, and now everything is on his shoulders. Now, a lot of palace intrigue about how he became king. You can go back and read that, and the kind of the lobbying that his mother did for him, and there was some real tension here and some actually touch and go stuff. This could have turned out completely different, but God had other plans. So when you look at him and the things that he says, like those what we just read, vanities, all is vanity, and then the things that he says, there sounds to be such a futility, but is that how it actually began? And this is something that's really quite amazing. After his time and after he has passed, you find that this is very much the same thing that was said to Jeroboam after the split in the nation. When Solomon dies and it becomes a split, divided nation of Israel, the north, and of Judah, the south, Jeroboam was given the same thing and never did as Solomon did. This is an amazing thing that he looks at here, and he recognizes, how on earth do I follow David, that king? How on earth can I follow that act, if you will? And when I say act, it's like, how do I get on stage after that, considering who David was? Now, what we read in verse 3 of chapter 3, this is right at the beginning of things, and he recognizes his limitations, which is a hugely, hugely important thing. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. Now, that's said in retrospect of what we're going to read here in just a moment. Now, that's something to keep in mind. And that was not like a lifelong thing. That seems to be much more of a temporal thing, but it dominates the middle part of his kingdom, and it was not a good option. So it says here in verse 4, now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for there was a great high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar at Gibeon. The Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream that night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give to you?" Now stop for a second and just try to take all of this on in your mind. Imagine God coming to you, and you realize already God knows his heart, and he knows what he's about to say to him. So God already knows that there's this turmoil going on in his mind. How do I do this? How do I become the king after David? You never want to follow that kind of a man. And people are going to scrutinize everything that you do. So God comes to him and says, "What would you have me to give to you?" So clearly, God knows what's going on in Solomon's heart. Maybe he's even poured it out for him before, but now God comes to him as he sleeps and says, Solomon said, "Well, you have shown great mercy to your servant David and my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is to this day. Now, Lord, my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I'm a little child, and I do not know how to go out or to come in." That means how to lead your people, because David would do that. He would lead the people out, bring them back in as the king, who was also, a military force. And so, Solomon sees that. Now, How much he paid attention is anybody's guess, but clearly he sees this and recognizes, I don't feel up to the task, and I can completely understand that. Now let's also remember something else. He has to have heard this, because David was told by Nathan the prophet, when he was ready to build God a house, God said, I didn't tell you, Nathan, to tell him to build me the house. I don't want him to build it. You go back and tell him he's not going to build it. I'm going to build a house for him, which means a heritage, a legacy, and it will be his son who will build my house. Now, of course, we know that the temporary house was built by Solomon. The enduring eternal house is going to be by another descendant of David's, that being Jesus. So we get that. Now, where he goes on from this, he goes, I don't know how to do what my father did. You know, he's the measure. And at that time, really think about it, there had only been 2 kings. Solomon doesn't want to be Saul. Solomon wants to be David, but how do you do it? So that's where he is in his heart. Now, verse 8 says this, and your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be counted. So there's twofold problem. The numbers are incalculable how many people are here. You can't census them, shouldn't anyway, but you can't even count them. There are so many people that are your people, and they're the ones that you have chosen. So of all the people on the earth, Deuteronomy 7, you've chosen them above all the other nations. So he knows all of this. He knows David is the standard. He knows that he's the promised prophetic son who's going to build the temple for God. And he also recognizes that he's the head of a nation that God has chosen from among all on the earth. That's an enormous amount of pressure. So he says, therefore, would you give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this great people of yours? In the history of great answers, this is at the top of the list for great answers. So he asks for the one thing that he recognizes that he is completely deficient in. And this is instructive for us. This is such a good thing about, people will sometimes say, what should I be praying for? There's a lot of things you should pray for your family, your friends, that God would give you opportunity to preach the gospel, that you would be a faithful witness, and all the rest of those things. Sure, that's on everybody's prayer list. If you're going to be honest about looking at yourself, which he's done here, he realizes I have some real glaring deficiencies. So God, will you make up what I lack that I do not possess? Can you give me those things? It's the perfect request. And of course, he means it sincerely. It's not that he's trying to pull one over on God. You can't do that. And we know that that's the case because of how God honors the request. So the speech, verse 10, pleased the Lord, and that Solomon had spoken this thing. So then God said to him, now because you have asked this thing, and you have not asked long life for yourself, nor have you asked for riches for yourself, nor have you asked for the life of your enemies, but you have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is just, or justice. And then he says this, behold, I have done according to your words, and see, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there is not anyone, has not been anyone like you before, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all of your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David has walked, then I will lengthen your days. Now, interestingly enough, that's what he was promised at the beginning. Now, you can see that he clearly failed in some of this because he is really lamenting these things at the end of his life. So there's clearly something that he looks back and he realizes there are things that I have absolutely failed. But when you look at God's words here, is there any way that someone could fail at a task when God has said that? So I am pleased with your request. I'm pleased that you didn't ask for the things that everybody else would have asked for. You actually recognize the gravity of your position, and you've asked that you would be able to do it. And so God says, not only am I going to answer that, I'm going to make you so far above the others like you that you'll stand alone. And so no one will ever be like you, and no one has ever been like you. Which, when you start to look through his life as it's recorded in Kings and other places where it's alluded to, there were people that came to see him. He was renowned worldwide. People wanted to come just to hear him speak about things. So God did amazing, incredible things through him. But yet we have the book of Ecclesiastes. So you just know that something went wrong, right? Let's turn to chapter 11, and we'll get our answer as to how that happened. So it's in chapter 11. Give you a second to get there. And it says this in verse 1. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughters of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. All things that should never have taken place. That was prohibited for them to do when they came into the land, and that was said to Moses. Don't intermarry with them, because you'll buy into their corruption. You'll buy into their idolatry, and you'll make yourself kind of an enemy of mine by doing those things. Well, this is what the caution was. Don't have anything to do with the unbelieving world around you. You are a chosen people. You're to be just only joined to those who are of the tribes of Israel. And again, by that time, there was so much diversity in them, it wasn't going to be a problem that happens when you're not marrying relatives. So there's not a problem with being able to do this. So it says, now, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel that you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Why? Surely they will turn your heart after their gods. And Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart from God, turned away his heart. For it was so that when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. So he went against the prohibitions. He went against the caution that he had at the beginning. Stop for a second and application. So there's the other part of learning how to study through the Bible is your observations come first. Who is Solomon? What's his pedigree? Who is he to be saying these things? What's his backstory? What happened in his life? These are the observational things that we're doing here. So then when you get to the application, okay, what do I learn from the guy's life? You can start out knowing everything that you're supposed to know, but the question is, will you continue that for a lifetime? Your walk with God is not supposed to be an on-again, off-again thing. It is, if you think about it this way, that idea of turning away from the things of the world to turn to him and embrace him is a lifelong pursuit, and you never take your eyes off. Anyone who has will tell you what ends up happening in that time. You take your eyes off of the Lord and you start to dabble and play back into the things of the world. It doesn't take long until that corruption becomes just overwhelming. And so here, Solomon would be able to coach you on that and tell you, don't do what I did. Frankly, the book of Ecclesiastes is kind of the epitome of that understanding. He realizes that what he's done has really caused the problem. So that brings us to Ecclesiastes. We know how he got here and why it all happened. So let's get to the book of Ecclesiastes and let's take a look at this. Now, the preacher, what we get here, the words of the preacher. Here's the discourse. Here's what he wants to say. And by preacher, the word preacher there is koheleth, and you only find it here in the book of Proverbs. He's the only one who uses the term. So when he says it, now listen to the words, or here's the words of the preacher, and he identifies himself, the son of David, the king of Jerusalem. There are other things that we just read from his little bit of pedigree there. You're going to find that he helps to identify himself in that part too as we go through this. You'll find some other places where he makes reference to stuff that we just read in chapters 3 and 11 from 1 Kings. So here is this person, and believe it or not, there are people that question whether or not it is actually Solomon who's writing this. And I don't think that there's a whole lot of debate here. How many sons did David actually have who became kings? And you're not going to be saying it's like kings down the road. Like, people would be able to say, yeah, they may be the great, 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 great grandson of David, but they're still the son of David. I don't buy that. And so David, the king of Israel, And then Solomon, of course, following in that line. And it really does, if you were to read Solomon's life and know about it, this sounds exactly like something that he would say in retrospect. So when he says this, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Everything about this life, it's empty and it is of no value. Now, again, we can see it from his point of view. Again, his world is a whole lot different than ours. Because again, if you're going to live according to the law, there's a real beauty to the whole thing. And he's writing this at the latter part of his life, and the temple is built. So the place of corporate worship would have been established at the time. If he's really writing this towards the latter part of his life, the temple's in operation. They would understand that by this time everything is kind of in its place. The nation is prosperous. You could pretty much have everything that a person could want to have in an earthly sense, and yet you see in him a frustration and a futility, almost a cynicism about things, because everything that someone could ever want is just never going to be satisfactory to them. So of course he wouldn't understand the world as we understand it. But from his point of view, from where he is, man, you couldn't have more options put before you, but the regret that would be there is that he failed in doing the one thing that he was told he needed to do at the beginning, and that's to walk before me as your father David walked before me, and he didn't do it. So now he looks back at this and just says, of a life, of everything that I could claim I had, with no lack and no want for anything, everything is no value, it's void, it's futile. There's just nothing to it, it's all vanity. So it's starting off pretty well, huh? And he says this. Now, we'll look at verses 3 to 7 because they pretty much have the same kind of a feel to them. It's that everything is in its own cycle. It kind of comes and it goes, but it's just it's on loop. Everything is on loop. And that's how he views this here by verse 3. He says, now, what profit has a man? And the profit would just very simply be those things that remain. What is it that's there? What benefit is all of this life experience if all you're going to do is experience the things that he has experienced? And again, it's a very temporal, worldly look at things. And it's a good caution to us to say, how often do we as believers, knowing everything that we do, that he couldn't have possibly began to grasp, how often do we become completely engaged and even affected by the things of this world? That's a problem. Shouldn't be the case. We should never have that affect our lives to that extent. Well, here he says, what profit is it? What's lasting? What's the benefit? What remains from all of what we've produced? What profit has a man for all of his labor, the things that he's produced, in which he toils under the sun, kind of like from sun up to sundown? He does all of the things, the work that he does, and at the end of the day, what's left? What's going to be enduring? What's left behind? So, if you've been like, well, pretty much everybody that ever has to live in this life, you're a kid, you don't have to worry about it, but sooner or later you got to adult. And once you start to adult, and we all remember when it happened, we get into the workforce. And if there's some here that are listening, that are young enough and you're still in school or whatever else may be, great, enjoy that while you can, because the day will come when you'll have a way that you're earning a living. You'll work from morning to night, you'll come home, you'll rest, and you'll go to sleep, but you're going to go right back to it the next day. If that is the way it's viewed, that there's this never-ending loop, then you will never be satisfied with things. It's best to just say, God, how can you use me today in the place that you've given to me, with one eye looking forward to what will be when we're done with this temporary life. So he says this, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. So that's the only constant that he sees. But even in the earth, as he describes it, it's also on its loop. Sun up, sun down, water goes one place, it comes back to another. Even that itself, though it's a perpetual thing, the earth is going to be the same there through the generations, but one generation passes to the next, and then it's just on to the next thing. Now, it says, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth remains forever, or it abides. The sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. So it's always on a cycle, sun up, sun down, and it'll come back the next day at sunrise. So it's always to the point where, he would pretty much be able to understand. But for us, we realize that it's not always the same. that there are some days that are longer and some days that are shorter, depending on what part of the time of the, where we are in the world and what time during the year. They've got it to the point now where they'll tell you exactly when sunrise is, to the minute. We know those things because God's creation is so predictable when it comes to that. We can always know when that's going to be. They'll tell us what sunrise and sunset is. But as he sees this here, it's even a little bit further than that. So he says the wind, it goes forward to the south, towards the south, and then it turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually, and it comes again in its circuit. Now, that's his perception. Wind works a little bit different than that. It's not just a simple, easy direction of north to south. It moves around. It does all the things that it does. He doesn't have radar. He doesn't have weather patterns. Let's be honest. We're thinking about a guy writing basically 3,500 years back. So, or 3,000 years back, rather. Long, long time ago. And so he's just making the observations. Like, everything is really kind of on repeat. It's on its own cycle. It goes in circuit. And so you can see where he has this kind of thing, there's a futility to it. Remember, that's what he said, basically. Everything is vain. There's vanity to it. It's of no value. It's just on repeat. We're just here for a time, but it's going to continue on, and long after we're gone, it's going to keep going. Now, again, that's what you'll kind of get from people that you might talk to who have no hope of eternity, no hope of heaven. This life is all that there is. There's really kind of a futility, and that's the let's eat and drink for tomorrow we die kind of a thing. This is all that there is. That's the worldly philosophy. And to some extent, this is Solomon making that case, though the more that we read, we'll realize that he kind of comes around. But that's his observation without any mitigating factors, without the idea that God exists and that there's more to this life than just this. But if it's the observable world, and if it's that which you're going after to try to make something of it, and you put all of your time and resource into the pursuit of those things, there's nothing but futility. There is nothing there for you. It's all vanity. That you can understand. So to us, as we make application to this, I do not disagree with this at all. And it's one of the wonderful things about it. Paul reasons it this way in 1 Corinthians 15, that he says, look, if in this life only, while we're alive on this earth, that we have a hope of resurrection and a life after this, if that's the only thing, if that's only for here and it really doesn't exist down the road, we should be pitied above everybody else, because we're putting all of our trust and hope on a future thing that really isn't even there. And Paul doesn't say it in a way of argument that that's a potential. He says, no, I want you to understand how important it is that we believe that God has a forever for us, because we're not people who get to that place of just saying, is it really there? Remember, his whole point is the resurrection. So he says, and so if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, we aren't. Everything that we've been able to say to you is not going to come to pass. We've been lying to you. And that's where he says, we're just pitiful people if that's the case. But he begins chapter 16 by saying, but he has risen. Verse 20. He says, but he has risen from the dead, and he has become the first fruits, the first of a kind. He died, rose again, never to die again. That's the promise that's been given to us. So just really, really great stuff. When we stop to think about the world that he would have had at his time and what he would have seen, it looks so different to us because the gospel changes everything. Everything. So hopefully you're getting that. Now, verses 8 and 9, we read this. All things, everything that we do, the life itself, the way that people exist, all things are filled with labor, toil, whatever you want to call it, and man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. There's always the pursuit for more. So man is never satisfied. It's always a pursuit for something. You may go to bed dog tired and you can't keep your eyes open for another day or for another second, and you wake up in the morning and it's the same pursuit. There's never enough. It's never enough. Well, some people will live an entire life having really much of nothing. Remember who it is that's saying this. This is Solomon. Money was no object to him. Prestige, position, the way that people would view him. There was nobody like him. And yet he can say, because of worldly pursuits, this is the futility of it. It's profound if you really stop to think about it, because you would figure, I mean, how many times have we done it? Man, if I didn't have to work another day because I was so fabulously wealthy, what would my life be like? Well, depends on what you do with your time and where you keep your focus, because we can look at this guy here and you could say, this guy's miserable. As he says this part here. Again, as we go on further through this, you'll see that he starts to work through it. But if the lowest, if you will, the lowest part of his life was all that he could say, that's what we're reading here. So there's more to it, and we'll get to it. Now, verse 9 says this, that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. So however things were, they're going to continue that same way. They're static. And, again, if it's only the earthly pursuits, he is absolutely 100% right in this. Now, here's a cool thing. Making application to that. If you're a believer listening to me, you would be able to say, if you know the day that you were saved, me, I'm not one of those guys. I can tell you the year, and I can tell you the time of year, but I don't even remember the event. But whenever it is that Jesus became somebody real to you, that completely breaks what he says here of just the earthly existence. So let me read it again. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Every person who is a believer in Jesus Christ and has been born again is the complete exception to this rule. And it is a rule, let's be honest, because for the unbelieving world, the unbelieving person, there's nothing new in this existence. It's the same thing. They get older, they might have different pursuits down the road, but still, it's just the futility of life, and there's nothing, no expectation. When you can look at your own life and say, I've been born again, that changed everything. That's the complete break of this cycle of humanity and human existence, that a person can be born again and animated to God. So Solomon doesn't give that caveat. He couldn't understand that. He doesn't know that. But we can look at this and say, there's nothing wrong with what Solomon's saying. He's absolutely true. It should just give us an appreciation for how radically altering the existence of Jesus and what he does in the believer changes this in a 180-degree direction. So I can look at this and say, this is the world's existence. Verse 8 and 9, that's the world. The believer lives in that world, but something has changed. And everything changed dramatically that day. It's not the same. Nothing is the same since that day. And so if somehow you reached this study and you're listening to this and you go, I've heard about Christians, but you're not actually one, contact me through the ministry's website. It's oldpaththeology.net. I'd love to have a discussion with you, because it's not about saying a prayer. It's not about joining a church. It's not about giving money. It's about looking at the person who can save you in the eternal sense and give you a hope that's beyond this world and change everything about how you view the world. He can do that. He's done it with me. It's almost 40 years ago. No looking back. So when we read verse 10, we see this. Now, is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. Now let's stop there, because it goes right along with the rest. Anything that's new. Can anybody actually look and say there's something that's new? Now, let's make sure we understand this. This is about the human experience. It's not about technology. It's not about times. It's not about somebody saying, well, I've got an iPhone now. I couldn't have had that 20 years ago. He's not talking about that. He's talking about the human experience. So what it is to be a human being on just the most basic level, not about the things that can be added to you. It's just, what can you say? What has changed? What's different? What breaks the cycle? And in my Bible here, I don't know when I wrote it down, but it's been here for a while. But I wrote down in here 2 Corinthians 5:17, and that's where it says that anyone that is in Christ is a new creation, and the former things have passed away. Behold, all things become new. Once again, it captures the idea that something dramatically and unique and unprecedented happened when Jesus made the way to heaven and he made the way to salvation possible. Everything changed there. And I hope that we genuinely understand that, because it's such a profound thing. It's such a wonderful thing. So we read what he says here in for the believers, once again, new creation in Christ Jesus turns verse 10 on its head. Solomon couldn't have understood it. Solomon is not wrong as far as the earthly pursuits of things. Only a spiritual rebirth changes that, and that's only offered to those who will accept the gift offered to them. Jesus says, I offer you eternal life on my terms. Understand what those terms are, because I offer it to you for free. The person that would say, I accept that offer and I'll take what you're offering to me. Again, I'm simplifying it, but that changes everything. Nothing is the same from that time on. So you can actually, at that point, you'd be able to say, nothing is new except for that. That is the one exception where you can say, man's existence, it's never going to change, except for the person who will come to a relationship with the God who loves them and save them in the person of Jesus Christ. That's the one change. So it says, now there is no remembrance of the former things, nor will there be any remembrance of the things that are to come. Now, interestingly enough, that's in the little minutia type things is more what he's saying. Just the day-to-day of life, it comes and goes, you don't even remember it. He's not speaking about the very monumental things. Let's remember, this is King Solomon, and he's, within eyesight of the temple complex. So he's built the temple. Clearly, that's something that everybody remembers. When we go to Israel, we still see portions of what's left of the temple that was rebuilt by Herod, which is, better than 2,000 years old. So we still remember. We're reading a Bible that has the history of mankind starting from Abraham at 4,000 years ago all the way to the beginning of the creation, some 6,000 shortly thereafter, in round figures, right about there. Yeah, I believe in a biblical creation. I don't believe in millions of years. I don't believe in gaps. I don't believe in any of that stuff. The scripture doesn't really give that opportunity. It doesn't give that option. So anyhow, different topic, different day. I actually have something on the website for it, on the actually on the YouTube channel. I discussed this with my friend Russ Miller. If you're interested there, you can go look at it on the YouTube website about the age of the earth. Very, very important stuff that the church should know. So here, when we get to places like when we're in Israel, we're seeing ruins that are thousands of years old. So clearly you will remember some things, but it's just the day-to-day of the life of people that they'll come and go, and they're basically their footprint in life is minimal, and it's something that another generation comes behind, and the further that you get away from it, it's completely forgotten. And interestingly enough, a guy like Solomon, you can't forget. He's been had too much of an imprint. David, guys like that. But we run across people in the scriptures constantly that we're given proper names. And only in that one particular verse will we see a name, but we know nothing at all, nothing whatsoever about that person. And at least there's enough about them that their name is recorded somewhere. But how many people here came and went and you never even heard about them? So even to some extent, even life can be like that, but there are exceptions to it, many exceptions. Things that happened in times past that are remembered. But just the day-to-day of it, just the existence, is not something that's remembered from generation to generation. So it says there won't be any remembrance of those things that are to come. So even into the future, what we forget about the group past, we're doing and setting our things in motion now, and the people won't remember us, and those people won't be remembered by the people after them. It's just that, again, it's the futility that he's putting. And so they won't be remembered by those who come after. So if that was it, and the whole book of Ecclesiastes was 11 verses, it would just be a depressing thing. There's much more that he has to say, and I really, you can go ahead and look at it. If you read the end of the chapters, at the end of the book rather, he just says, how do I summarize everything? It's all the things in between, and they're so practical and so important, and they're so good for us to learn and to know. So I want to stop it there. We'll pick up next week. It's kind of a paragraph break. But I wanted to do that little bit of just kind of looking through at the history part of it. And where did he come from? Why would a man say these kind of things? And he started out so incredibly well. What did he do in his disobedience that caused the failure? It's really good and instructive for us when we read things like this to say, so what was his failure exactly, and how can we learn from that failure so that we don't repeat it? And if we see other things that he does where you say, that's just really brilliant, Proverbs was filled with those kind of things. Let's learn the things that are done well and let's repeat those. Let's learn about the things that were done poorly and not repeat them. Those things are put there, as Paul reasons through that in 1 Corinthians 10. Those things were written for our admonition, and they were written so that we could learn those things, not to repeat them. So very, very good counsel in that. Really super important that we recognize the things that are being said in that. So I want to go ahead and deal with this idea of Zionism and Christian Zionism. And we're not going to have to read a whole lot. I'll give a couple of scriptural references. But when it comes to the topic of what's known as Christian Zionism, again, there was a video that I had watched, and the problem that we ran into, or that I ran into when I was watching it, is I believe that it misses an understanding of what the text would have to say, and it doesn't take a couple of things into consideration. So first of all, people that would look at a person like myself, I can just say right up front, I support Israel's right to be in the land. And I'll address the people who are in charge of it and all of that as we go through this, because something needs to be said about that as well. But the question is, the actual land of Israel itself and the idea of the people returning to it. Are they the rightful owners? Are they the rightful heirs of it? And that's the issue. So the people who have a problem with quote-unquote Christian Zionism will look at any particular groups of people that support Israel's right, and they think that somehow we support everything that is done, and we don't have anything critical to say about any part of it. It's when you start to focus in on the individuals, on the state, how they came into being, all of those kind of things, the modern history of it, you're missing the point. So if people are trying to get upset about the interaction that there is between Jews and non-Jews in the surrounding countries, that is not even Zionism. That's not even the discussion of Zionism. Those are actually the results of the nation coming back into existence. They're going to have opposition. They've had it for thousands of years. So show me any group of people on the planet throughout all of history who have been more designated for extermination than the Jews. There isn't anyone even remotely close to them. So something big is going on. There's a spiritual side of this. So when it comes to the idea of Christian Zionism, let's dispel a few myths. The belief goes like this, that Israel doesn't really have any kind of a historical right to the land. They lived there at one time. They've got some history, but it's not really theirs to take. It's not theirs necessarily to possess. And they think that the only reason that they're there is because of something that happened from 1947 into 1948, and they declared themselves a nation. By the way, in October when we go there, we'll be going to the place where David Ben-Gurion actually said that. It's kind of their version of an Independence Hall like we have in Philadelphia. Anyway, they will say, see, that's really where it started. And there were the Rothschilds and some others that helped them to do it. And it was really just kind of a New World Order thing. And so they dismiss it away, that it's really not a legitimate right that they have to the land. So they shouldn't be there. They're just the usurpers. They showed up and everybody was happy until they got there. Well, hate to break it. Well, no, I don't hate to break it to people. Ignorance is not a good excuse. There was a university already in place there before Israel became a nation. There was already education, people that were already living there. But the university that's there now, the oldest university, was founded in 1924. There's the first hospital that was there started out as just almost like what we would consider as a modern clinic, all the way into a major hospital, and that was in the early part of the 1800s. So long before there was even a Jewish state, there were people who wanted to be there. There's a place there known as Herzliya that we were at. We stayed there for a night when we first come into the country, but it's because of a man named Herzl. He was the man that had the vision that he wanted to have a Jewish state for the people, for the Jewish people. They've been displaced from it by his time for 1800 plus years, and he wanted to see a place that could be theirs. And so that's where the modern Zionism movement, returning to the land, and that's how he would put it, returning to land, getting them a homeland, but they recognized that that was their ancestral home. That's where the big dispute is, and as a result of that there are people that would say Israel doesn't have a right to be in the land. It's not theirs to have, it's not theirs to possess. Well, If you're a Christian and you take a step beyond that, then you're referred to as a Christian Zionist if you support the people of Israel's right to be in the land. I am what people would classify and want to label me as a Christian Zionist. I don't dispute that. I absolutely believe that they are the people who are supposed to be in the land, and here's why I believe that. Now, some people will say, well, you're twisting the Bible to say things that it doesn't. Let me first of all address the idea of the prophecy part of it, and that I see that there are some future things. Again, usually when it's said by the people who can't stand our view of it, they'll say, oh, these are the people who read that book of Revelation, and they think that Israel has to be in the land for a bunch of battles and a bunch of wars and all that other stuff. And basically that's all stuff that really got popularized in the last couple of years, or a couple of hundred years, by John Darby and Schofield and Margaret MacDonald and all that rapture stuff. That's where they just think that they can dismiss it. And they don't. When I'm talking with somebody like that, or somebody brings that up, I realize I'm not talking with a serious person. They're just repeating something that they've already heard. We'll have a short coming up shortly soon that talks about the people who were writing about the rapture well before Darby, well before the 1800s even began, before the 19th century. Separate item though, but anyway, that's what they'll say, that the new modern Christian Zionists are taking it from a few verses here and a few verses there, and some crazy people in the early 1800s who came up with this idea of dispensationalism and the rapture of the church, and that's where it's come from, and that's kind of the root of the Christian Zionism problem. Again, they can say that all that they want to, but they're just, to me at that point, and I'm sorry if this upsets somebody, they're just demonstrating their ignorance of the topic. So here's where Zionism comes from, and where Christian Zionists, as myself, here's why we believe what we believe. We believe, first of all, that the Bible teaches in really obvious, in very obvious language, your chapters to go and look at. People hear me say this a lot, often, just it keeps coming up in conversations. But go and read what was said to Abraham beginning at Genesis chapter 15, and it runs all the way through chapter 17. Those 3 chapters kind of tells you when God says, I'm going to make a great nation out of you, Abraham. And Abraham doesn't ask if Sarah has anything to do with it. So chapter 15 is really where he says, I'm going to make this an everlasting covenant with you and with your offspring. Well, they both think that they're beyond childbearing years, and that's where chapter 16 comes in, and that's where the problems begin. They come up with the idea between Sarah and Abraham that they will give to Abraham Hagar, Sarah's handmaiden, and they have a child together, and his name is Ishmael. And so when chapter 17 rolls around and the time comes for that promise of chapter 15 to be spoken about again, God says it is not going to be Ishmael. That's his way of saying, you've taken matters into your own hands. I'm not going to have him be the son of the promise. It's going to be Isaac, the son that will be born to you. Now, the thing is, he says that at that point is twofold. It's first of all, the promises that I'm making to you, Abraham, they're going to come through Isaac, from Isaac to Jacob, and then from Jacob then down to the sons of Jacob, the what we know as the tribes of Israel, or the children of Israel. That's the promise, and it's, if you read through chapters 15 and 17 in particular, it is an everlasting promise that God gives. And when he says everlasting, it doesn't mean that just until they fail. So it means it's an everlasting, and he tells them who it is through Isaac, and then also how long will it take place? It will be for everlasting. And where will it be? He tells him the territory. Actually, it's a territory far larger than they ever took. So if you go read it, it's, I think, verse 18 of chapter 15 of Genesis, but he says river to the Euphrates. So that's the Euphrates to the Nile and everything in between. So they never took anywhere near that, but just what they have has been in their possession since the time that Joshua brought the children of Israel in. That's when they actually took the land. So God made the promise to them everlasting, not only the genealogy, but also the land itself. Now, there was something that was conditional about it. The promise of the land and the promise of the people is everlasting. Their time in the land, however, was conditional. And you can read this for yourself, 2 Chronicles chapter 7, read the entirety of the chapter, and you'll find at the dedication of the temple when Solomon is saying that we've built this, we want you to be here, this is your house. Solomon understanding we are wayward people, he knows very well. We're reading about it in Ecclesiastes. But he says, if by chance we do something that provokes you and we find ourselves displaced, will you return us? And let us have this place again, and if we get our act together. So that's the promise, and God says, well, yes, my people, if they'll do this, then I'll return them. And he says that to them, but if they don't, then I'm going to remove them. I'll let them be gone from the land. Now, he didn't say that I'm going to remove them from the land forever. There's a displacement. There are so many passages that you can read, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Chapter 30 of Jeremiah is a great example of that. And he talks about in the latter days, when he's talking about what God's going to do, he says, I'm going to return both Israel and Judah to this land. Now, Israel and Judah, that's a way of identifying all of the tribes, the sons of Jacob. Israel and Judah are two of his sons. But they really represent the 12 tribes original, but then the one that is actually, there's a double part that goes to Joseph, that being Ephraim and Manasseh. So there's 13 that are actually mentioned in the land, because Joseph, one of the sons of Jacob, becomes Ephraim and Manasseh, his two sons. They both get an allotment of land. So that's what's given to them, and they are told through Jeremiah that the day is coming when God will at some point down the road, in this case, 2,600 years later, he's going to bring them back into the land, Israel and Judah. Now, the important part is that Jeremiah is talking about something that had not existed since the death of Solomon, when the nation was split into Israel and Judah, and Israel was removed by the Assyrians before Nebuchadnezzar took out the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. So they had been displaced, and they had not been a governing authority in their land since that time. Even when they were brought back after their displacement to Babylon during the Persians, they were still displaced again by the Romans down the road. So God has never gathered them back. Israel and Judah have never been back in the land as the sovereign over their own country. They were always a vassal state of someone else, whether it was the not the Babylonians, but whether it was the Persians or whether it was the Greeks or the Romans. They were always there under the being just kind of a far-flung region of a great empire elsewhere in the world. In our modern times, last century, they came back into the land, and they are now sovereign over their own country. Are they walking with God? Not yet. But notice what he ends up saying in chapter 30. He goes on a little bit further down in verse 7. He talks about the things that will happen because they are back in the land, and he starts to talk about things that we would consider as during the tribulation, because he says it's a time of Jacob's trouble as he describes it. So he's clearly talking about something that is future when they're brought back into the land, which has never happened in history until last century, 48. And what we have in modern times is waiting for the time as Christians when the Lord returns for the church, and the focus becomes Israel, and nations will come against it. That's the time of Jacob's trouble. It's not the time of the church's trouble. So, interestingly enough, another passage that you're welcome to go ahead and look at, it's found in Amos chapter 9. I mention it often, verses 14 and 15, where God says that there's going to be a time when he will once again bring them back into the land, and they will never be displaced. So from the time that Amos wrote that, you can say that they came back from the Babylonians, but they were displaced again. So they were displaced by Babylon, brought back into the land, displaced yet again by the Romans. So Amos was never fulfilled until modern times, potentially. Now, if God, for whatever reason, has more time on the clock than I think that there is, they could be displaced again, but he's still ultimately, for Amos to be true, they will be back in the land, and he'll bring them there. Not because they got their act together with the Lord. None of those verses that talk about that is because they started to follow after the Lord, or Ezekiel's prophecies about it as well. It's because he's brought them back in the land, and ultimately some will turn to him during a time of incredible adversity. So as a Christian Zionist, or somebody that, they throw that label at us because they want us to defend it. No, I do believe that God is going to return his people back to their land because he promised that he would. It isn't about who the government is. Doesn't matter who the prime minister is at any given time. Doesn't matter who's in the Knesset. Doesn't matter who's in the judiciary. That stuff is all secondary. That's just the people who are in power at the particular time. The question is, yes or no, is God the one who's ultimately responsible for bringing them back into the land because he promised that he would? If we agree that that's the case, then they're the ones that are in the land because he's brought them into the land. And if he doesn't displace them, if he doesn't allow them to be displaced, it's a fulfillment of prophecies that have been sitting out there for 2,600 years. In Amos's case, even longer than that. So very, very important for us to take a look at the world around us and say, it's not about anybody, any group of people, or about whoever's in charge there in Israel at any particular time. They're secondary. They just happen to be the players on the board. But the question is God actually making good on a promise that he made to bring his people back into the land, because he has bigger plans, things that are going to be happening soon. So that's my view of it, which makes me a, quote, Christian Zionist. I support the people of Israel, though I don't believe that they are all walking with God. Like, there's nothing in scriptures that tell me that that's going to be the case. In fact, they're brought back into the land during a time of real adversity. And it's been that way since they've come back in the land. It's always some state of war. The day will come when many will turn to the God of their heritage. The scripture talks about that as well. So that's where we are in the timeline. It's why I have no problem supporting them. I don't have to support the government. There have been times when they've had prime ministers that I think are a disaster. Their judiciary is a mess. And their Knesset is made up, their parliament, if you want to call it that, but their Knesset, basically their version of the parliament, has some pretty unsavory characters in it, and people who are very subversive toward the country. But that's not Zionism. It's the Zionism that I'm talking about is what God is doing on the spiritual side of bringing his people back in. Who is in charge at any particular time is a secondary issue. They just happen to be the ones that are in there, in those positions at this time. But we have to answer the very simple question. Is God making good on a promise because he promised that he would do it? So if people don't see that, they're not looking at the text. They're looking at the news. So important that we make those distinctions. If you have any questions on that or anything else that we went through in the study, please contact me through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net. We are making a trip to Israel in October, and we would love to have you with us. We leave on the 20th if you'd like details about that. Again, oldpaththeology.net. Send me an email, and I'll be happy to send you the details on that or answer any of your questions. So we'll pick up at verse 12 in Ecclesiastes 1 next week.